So let's start off with energy, and energy is an exquisitely complex subject. And it's an exquisitely complex industry covering solid fuels, liquid fuels, gas fuels, nuclear. We've had a whole talk on nuclear, a massive field in itself, but no less massive or more massive than the other ones. Hydro, solar, wind, and each of these has subsections. So solid is coal, wood, biomass. Liquid is crude oil, petrol and diesel. Gas, natural gas, shale gas, that's fracking. And petroleum gas, it's a byproduct of petrol production. Nuclear industry, there's a whole lot of technologies, we've heard about it today. Hydro, there's dams, the conventional what you think about hydro, but there's also run of river. This is where they don't build a dam. They just generate electricity from the flow of water down the river. That's what's happening in the Congo. It's not a dam, it's a run of river hydro plant. So there's hydro, but also what about ocean currents? It's also water. This is an emerging technology. Then we have tidal power. We have an estuary. The water goes into the tide, into the estuary, and then the low tide, the water comes out of the estuary. So this flow of water into and out of estuaries can be harnessed. It's a mature technology. There are plants that run on tidal power. And then wave technology, harnessing the waves of the ocean. These are all kinds of hydropower. Solar, of course, we've got photovoltaic, concentrating solar. We've got solar water heaters, these things you see on geysers. So solar is a massive field in its own right. Wind, small, large, it's a technology, and it's the fastest growing technology of them all. So it's exquisitely complex, and the interesting thing is, you go from coal, not to electricity, you go from coal sometimes to liquid fuel, to petrol, that's Eskom, or you go from coal to gas, you have coal gasification plants. And then from gas to electricity to the customer, converted to mechanical energy, pistons, wheels, fans, compressors, etc., etc. So this is a very complex field, and it's a whole massive industry, and it's an enabling industry. So, energy used to be a real boring subject that nobody had ever heard of and that nobody was interested in because it was abundant, it was cheap. We used it like there was no end to it. We polluted the air, the water, the ground. It just seemed to dissipate, it's just in the air, etc. But it's changed. Today, energy has become the focus of attention. It's at a consumer level, at an industry level, at a government level. Energy drives this country, and it is as important as water and housing and education and health. Energy is a ministry now. So we have a minister of energy. We didn't used to. It used to be minerals and energy, and before that I don't know what it was. But now we have a minister of energy, Tina Johansson. Not sure what she knows about energy, but she's our new Minister of Energy, and she's got a daunting task on her hands. We have a whole Department of Energy. Unfortunately, it's a very weak department. I must tell you, very weak. We have a number of acts of Parliament, one of which is called the Energy Regulation Act, which requires the minister to look at all these energy sources and produce a so-called integrated energy plan for South Africa. She is required to do this by law. Once a year, publish an updated integrated energy plan so that the industry can do what it has to do and get on with it. This law was passed 5 years ago. We haven't got the first integrated energy plan published in South Africa. Not one. The minister is in breach of her own law that her own department published. This is not just the current minister, Tina Johansson, but the previous minister and the previous and the previous, because in the last 10 years we've had 7 ministers of energy. Can you believe it? This is an important portfolio that critically drives the economy and the country, but it's not been given the right priority.
Do you want to be minister?
No. No. Below the integrated energy plan, we have what we call the integrated resource plan for electricity, IRP 2010 to 2030. It's a 30-year plan. We do have that. And by the way, above all of this, above the IEP, we have a policy. We have a government white paper on energy. It was published about 12, 13 years ago. Only trouble is we've never implemented it to this day. We have a policy that we've gone 180 degrees opposite to what our official government white paper on energy policy document says about electricity. We've done the opposite. The IRP we do have, but already it's out of date, needs to be updated, and it hasn't been implemented in accordance with the plan yet. I want to say this is the source of energy. We have no energy crisis. Believe you me, energy is abundant. The world does not need to worry about running out of energy. There is a huge source of energy, both renewable and non-renewable. The problem is we have a management crisis, not an energy crisis. That's what I want to say about energy. We now move into electricity. Electricity is a really unique form of energy in a way. In fact, it's not really a form of energy. It's what I call an energy carrier. It carries in, you have nuclear, and then it converts to electricity, and electricity is used as a carrier to where it's going to be used, and it transports that energy from the source, the power station, to the user instantaneously. Not in a couple of microsecond delay. So it's a unique carrier of energy. It cannot, on its own, cannot be stored. Not at all. It can be converted to other forms of energy which can be stored, like hydro energy is stored in a dam. That's what we call potential energy. You can convert it to chemical energy, which is a battery. But electricity on its own cannot be stored. It has to be transmitted and used. You cannot conglomerate it in a dam, of a dam of electricity. So that's what makes it unique, and it's an energy carrier. And the industry, and it's an instantaneous industry carrier, but it requires you to build a massive infrastructure. In other words, it does this thing, magic things instantaneously, but you have to invest a lot of money. And in an entire carrier system which consists of generation, transmission, and distribution infrastructure. So it's expensive to build the infrastructure. Once you've got it, it's a magic form of transporting. Okay, so when it comes to electricity, I want to talk about a little bit. We have the cost of electricity, and we have the price of electricity. Now, the cost is what it costs to generate electricity and to transmit it and to distribute it to the user. That's the cost to the utility. And every power station in Eskom has a different cost of energy. So it's called the levelized cost of electricity for that power station, and it's expressed in cents per kilowatt hour for that power station. So as Rob said in the last slide, I mean, what would you guess of Eskom's fleet? Coal and hydro and renewables and things. What produces the cheapest electricity for Eskom? The cheapest. Well, it's not what people think. It's nuclear. Koeberg generates the cheapest. Not by a little bit, by far the cheapest. Because as Rob says, if you've paid back the capital cost in 25 years, for the next 25 years of its life, you are printing money. You are selling it at the price, but it's costing you just the cost of the fuel, which is very, very low. Very different to coal, very different to gas. So the levelized cost of electricity is very interesting. We're all very interested in Medupi. What is the levelized cost of electricity going to be from Medupi? People often say, oh, coal is so cheap, Eskom's price is so cheap, they're so, what a great utility. But just remember, they've got a whole lot of old power stations that are paid up, including Kubo, and they blend in the price of Medupi. So you don't really know what Medupi's price is. Its price of electricity is high. But when you blend it in with the low-cost generators in their fleet, you get the average cost of generation. So this cost of electricity is a very interesting parameter for journalists to explore. And just to comment on a previous speaker, we talked about the legal process in how the legal processes helps regulate and make people do the right thing and avoid anti-competitive behavior, etc., etc. As journalists, I want to tell you, The big companies love legal processes. They've got a team full of lawyers, Eskom, Telkom, or whatever, Massmart, you name it. When you've got a problem, safety problem, and you challenge them legally, they love you because they just put their lawyers onto you and they bury ICASA in the legal process for years, 10 years or something. The power of the journalist is infinitely more powerful and faster than the power of the legal process. When you're dealing with public companies, their reputation is the thing that drives their behavior. And exposing bad behavior through a journalist doing good investigative reporting is far more powerful and quick than a legal process, which they will love you. Which, if you take on the legal process, they got a 10-year breathing space. So journalism as a regulatory process is a wonderful and powerful, and a free media is a powerful tool. And achieves, I believe, more than the legal process does in many cases. The price of electricity is different from the cost of electricity, and the price of electricity is also exquisitely complex. It's in tariffs. Tariffs. Eskom has lots of tariffs, different customer classes. You know, small customers pay a lot more for electricity than large customers. A lot more, like 3 times more per kilowatt hour. People tend to think, oh, therefore, the small customers cross-subsidizing industry. No, not true. Actually, the large customers are cross-subsidizing small industry. The point of the matter is, it's much more expensive to deliver electricity to a farm on a hill or a dwelling on a hill out in the rural areas than and to service that customer and all the distribution in line to get it to him than it is to deliver electricity to a gold mine which is using massive quantities and taking power at high voltage. So the price of electricity through its tariffs is a lovely area for journalists to look at, but it requires an understanding of the costing process and the tariff process. I want to now just get on to Eskom, because that's really what we're here to talk about, and really what I'm trying to instill in you in this talk today is that energy and electricity and Eskom and the municipal electricity distributors are a fascinating topic for journalists and an important place for journalists to monitor the centers of power. Power in terms of economic power, but also power in terms of electric power. So journalist's job is cut out, and I'm in this sector and I just love it. You know, keeps me busy, you know, all the time, and it's a fascinating field, and there's lots to investigate, lots to write about. 5 years ago, people, you know, it wasn't even of interest, but today consumers are very interested in electricity, understandably, the price, the blackouts, etc., etc. So Eskom is a vertically integrated monopoly. It's a state-owned enterprise. It's a company registered in terms of the Companies Act. It didn't used to be, but it is a normal company. It pays tax. It's just another company, but it is a monopoly. That's what it is. The state is the only shareholder. These are part of the problems of Eskom, and we'll talk about that. And it has two split sort of areas that it has to pay attention to, because the Department of Energy that we talked about sets the policies, but the business, they report to the Department of Public Enterprises. So there's the split responsibilities. We've seen that also in other state-owned enterprises, like telecoms. So that's what Eskom is. But what also is it, in my view? Now, I'm only giving you my opinion, and there are many people who will tell you that I'm talking rubbish, but this is my opinion. I believe that as a company, it is a stumbling dinosaur. That it is slow, that it's inflexible, that it cannot respond to market needs in the way the market needs it to respond. It comes from, and you talked about this, it comes from this command and control history of our past governments in the old days, where they set up Sasol, and they set up Eskom, and they set up ISCO and Telkom as state-owned monopolies. And it comes from that history. It's actually, because it's command, it is socialist in its approach. That's how the socialists structure the economy, command and control. But it was the national socialist. It was nationalism and socialism put in a pot. Not a nice mix. But it's a command and a control history. But it happens now, whether they like it or not, to be in a modern, interconnected, market-based world. That's what we're in. You can argue it and don't like it, but that is what we are in. And as a stumbling dinosaur from this history, it is not meeting the needs of the market. You can see that. And as Eskom, there are two broad problems that I can see. There are structural problems of Eskom, and there are financial problems of Eskom. And as financial journalists, it's a wonderful area for you to delve into, because structural problems are all to do with the management and structure of the company, and the finance of the company is another area which financial journalists are interested in. So what is the structural problem, first of all, in my opinion? It is structured at the moment as a vertically integrated monopoly that includes generation, transmission, and distribution. And there's a need for it to restructure. Now, I want to tell you, it's not just my opinion that they need to restructure. The government white paper on energy 12, 13 years ago, published by the then Department of Minerals and Energy, was a far-sighted policy document that involved stakeholder input. It was a very far-sighted energy policy, unfortunately too far-sighted to be swallowed at the time in this last 10 years. It was too far-sighted, and we have a government which is pulling in different directions. So you have the socialists, it's SACP pulling in one direction, you have Labour pulling in another direction, you have the ANC pulling in another direction. So what happens when you pull a triangle, pull a center in three different directions? It stays. The status quo has remained. All these years, the status quo is just the same as it was in the days of the Nationalist Party. That's what Eskom has stayed at. There's still a vertically integrated monopoly, and it needs to restructure. How should it restructure? Like the white paper on energy says it should restructure. Like the official government policy says it should restructure. And what does that policy say that we've never implemented? It says generation must be separated in the structure and unbundled into a number of competing generating units. It must attract foreign capital for new generating units that will increase the number of unbundled units. So new power stations need to be built by independent organizations, and the existing Eskom generation must be unbundled into a number of independent companies that are competing. That's what it says. It says transmission is a natural monopoly that should be removed from generation and removed from distribution, and a so-called independent system and market operator needs to be established. This will be a government-controlled body that will control the access to the grid, who generates onto the grid, and who, in other words, the market operator will buy from the different generators and will sell on a market-based basis to the users of electricity. That's what the policy says. And distribution, which currently is run by 185 municipal distributors and 6 or 7 Eskom distributors. This huge, diverse tariff structures and complexities needs to be rationalized into a small number of economically viable regional electricity distributors. That's what the policy says. We've not done that one, we've not done that one, we have not done this one. We have the status quo at the moment. That's what the problem is. That's the problem with the structure of Eskom, is it hasn't been restructured into a modern, customer-focused unit that is appropriate for the modern world. We are stuck in a command and control world that is not appropriate for the modern world, in my opinion. So that's a great subject journalists can get stuck into. But there's also the question of finance. And unfortunately, this is where all the effort is going. We're now talking to the government. We've got to refinance Eskom. They got a cash flow crisis, equity, debt, the tariff. We're going to raise the prices. We're going to borrow as much money as we can, and we're not going to put any equity in because the government hasn't got the money and it's got other priorities, etc., etc. So all the effort has been looked at the financial thing, and none of it has been looked at the structural level. But they should actually. You need to look at both. But let's just look, and I'm going to just go through Eskom Finance 101. I mean, you're a finance journalist, maybe you've done economics and finance as a subject, but just the real basics of Eskom. Where does the money come from in a business? Where do you get the money in a business? The sources of finance comes from equity. Their shareholders put in equity capital. They put it into a bank account and they get given shares in return, and that's part of the kitty. Then you borrow money. Now, unfortunately, you can't borrow money unless there's some equity. Why would a lender lend money if the owners are not prepared to put in an equal amount of money? So debt-equity ratio of 1 is about nice. It means that the amount of equity and the amount of debt are the same. I mean, a lender feels quite comfortable. I'm putting in R1, the owner's putting in R1. Lekker. So you put that, you first of all, the shareholders put money in, and then against that money, you go and borrow money from the bank. And you get long-term debt, you get short-term debt, and you get very, very, very short-term debt, which is your overdraft facility. Overdraft facility is payable on demand. The bank says pay it back now, you've got to pay back now. Short-term debt, you've got a bit of breathing space to pay it off. Equity, you don't ever have to pay equity back. It's money you put in. They do get money back through to dividends, but only when there's a profit. So if you run for 10 years without a profit, the shareholders get nothing, not a cent. They put money in, but they get nothing out. So equity is like real long-term debt, like forever. And these are shorter-term debts up to overdraft. But you also get supplier credit. Suppliers will give you 30 days to pay. You deliver coal to Eskom, Eskom burns it, and they only pay them 30 days later. So actually, that's the source of finance, is supplier credit. Now, Finance 101. Sometimes, unfortunately, look, the employees in government departments, they do understand Finance 101. They've done courses and they've got degrees and all of this. But unfortunately, politicians generally don't understand Finance 101. Haven't a clue. They never did a degree or they never studied necessarily economics or finance or etc. So they're not all that clued up on Finance 101. But the fundamental rules of finance is long-term debt must fund long-term assets. And short-term debt must fund short-term assets. So the long-term debt, equity, and these things must fund your capital program. And short-term debt can fund things like buying of coal, paying of wages, doing your maintenance, etc., etc. But can you believe that these 101 finance are not understood by politicians, unfortunately? And that is half the problem. And I want to explain it. But before I do, the source of finance, okay, other sources of finance, but beyond these sources of finance, which is equity and debt, you also get money from operations, your profit on your operation. Every day you make a little bit of profit and that helps fund the business. And that's also very short term. So your sales mustn't fund your capital program because this is short term stuff. You might have a less profit 1 month, but you've still got to pay your debt off, your long term debt off. So you structure your business properly financially properly so that your long-term debt is servicing your long-term assets and your short-term debt or your short-term sources of finance or funding operations. That's what you should be doing. And in summary, you know, your money in a business comes from debt, borrowings, equity, shareholders' money, and tariffs. That's the sales. Now, in a normal company, there's a limit to your tariff. And the tariff, that limit is what your competitor is charging. Because if you charge more than your competitor is charging, your sales will go down. Simple as that. So in a normal business, your tariffs, there's a limit to what you can do on tariffs in terms of raising money. In a monopoly, it's different. The limits in the case of a monopoly are generally when we, the peasants, start revolting. Let them eat cake. You know, but if you can't afford the cake, you revolt. Okay? So when the peasants like us are faced with rising prices and we start revolting, that's the limit. That's the limit. Also, by the way, when the economy starts to really suffer enough to put us out of work, us the peasants. So when the economy, the price of electricity is really hurting the economy to the extent where we are out of work, we start revolting. And we are the shareholders because we are the voters who vote in the government who owns the shares. So in the case of a monopoly, the limits are higher than what you can do in a competitive environment. So we're in the monopoly environment and we're reaching this revolting stage. We're getting close to that. So we're reaching the limit on raising money through the tariffs. Eskom would like to put the tariffs up more, but we might just revolt. And when I say we, I mean industry and commerce and business and even domestic users and workers on the mines who go on strike. And, you know, they don't know where their money is going sometimes. But where is it going? It's going on energy. Food is energy. Petrol is energy. So food, transport, and electricity. Price is going up. They don't know why, but at the end of the month, they haven't got enough disposable income. Food, transport, electricity. That's where it's going. So we need to borrow more. If we can't put up the prices anymore and we've got to pay for things, we need to borrow more. And there's a limit to what you can do with your borrowings. It's based on your balance sheet. If you don't have the strong balance sheet, and if the rating agents start downgrading you, your debt-equity ratio has got to be right. Why? At the moment, Eskom's debt-equity ratio is about 0.1. Sorry, the equity to debt ratio is about 0.1. That means debt is way too high and equity is too low. And they go to the bank and they say, no, I don't want to borrow, or we put the price of the borrowings up. And the rating agencies downgrade you and the price of interest goes up. So at the moment, Eskom have borrowed about what their balance sheet will withstand. Now it's about equity. And the government says, well, the Treasury says, well, we don't have the money. What is that telling you? The shareholder doesn't have the money. It's not a problem. You need more shareholders. The government's not the only shareholder. There are many companies who would like to be shareholders in a monopoly. Believe me, many. But we are trapped ideologically in a business model that served the dinosaurs of the old government instead of a modern, well-financed business. Anyway. Yeah, you know, you have the sources of funding. Where does the funds get used? The new build program. The new build program needs to be financed from equity and long-term borrowings. It should not be funded by the tariff, according to Finance 101. Yet that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to finance everything through the tariff. And I think that monopoly, they can do anything. But they can't before the economy takes a nosedive or we start revolting. Wages and salaries must be funded from the tariff, short term. Maintenance must be funded from the tariff. Primary energy, that is coal, you know, a lot of that can be funded by suppliers of coal through credit. In other words, they supply you the coal, but you pay them 60 days later. That's great. So primary energy, you should try and get your suppliers to provide the finance through supply credit. Work in progress, same thing. Work in progress. In Eskom's context, what is work in progress? Well, you can't store electricity. So work in progress is not your pool of electricity. But believe me, on Eskom power stations, there's lots of coal in a big stockpile. That is their so-called work in progress. And again, you fund your work in progress, hopefully by your suppliers will fund a lot of that. And of course, you also, your capital, your finance is also applied in debtors. In other words, a lot of your capital that's put in by the supplier of finance is trapped in debtors. In other words, when your customers pay you. Because it would be lovely if when you deliver electricity to them, they paid you the next day, but they don't. Sometimes they never pay you. And Eskom has to write off a lot in theft and non-payment, a lot. In Soweto, 80% of electricity delivered to Soweto is not paid for. And that comes not from me, but from Eskom itself. They'll tell you that. So you know, a lot of your capital gets trapped. And sometimes they pay you in 30 days or 60 days or 90 days or 120 days or never. So a company like Eskom needs a lot of working capital. Working capital is critical, and you need to manage this. And what's important is you shouldn't try and finance your new build from the tariff or from any form of from your overdraft or any short-term source of funding. Shouldn't be funding that. But that's unfortunately what we're trying to do, because the government says, the shareholder says we don't have the money, and yet they're not prepared to allow they're acting like a dog in the manger. I can't do it, but I'm not going to allow anybody else to do it. And so eventually it's like the Berlin Wall. When you run out of money, the wall comes down. So that is really all I have to say about Eskom, that it has immense structural problems and it has immense financial problems. It seems that the effort at the moment is being focused on the financial issues, the recapitalization of Eskom, and not enough effort is being focused on the structural issues, which I think are being sadly neglected for over a decade. Thank you.